here, these videos will never happen. So let's get started. Okay. One of the hardest things to admit is that we could probably serve ourselves better having a different perspective. The reason that is hard is because it requires us to change. It requires us to change the way we think, the way we act, the way we live life. However, for something to look different, it has to look different. And I am sure there are things in your life that you wish looked different. I want to look at three different things. What does the world say? What do you say? And what does God say? When we break it down to those three different things, we're going to get three very different outcomes. When we stop and say, what does the world say about this? What is the world's perspective or the world's view? We're going to hear things like the way you should do things. We're going to hear things like expectations of who you are. Like I would right now be expected to have makeup on and my hair not soaking wet. However, what the world deems important is not always what is important. What is important is that this comes out of my heart and soul onto this video, and not that you see me looking perfect, although I am perfect the way that I am because I am created in God's image, but you get the point. So, what do we say? If you are like me, you might speak with fear, how we don't want to do things because this might happen or this bad result might come from being adventurous or risky. Our ego can keep us held back. It can keep us struggling to reach our favorite potential. On that note, we've talked before about our best, highest, and greatest self. However, what does it look like when we are our favorite self? We don't have to be our best self, our highest self, our greatest self. Those are things that will be done when we are done. We have not reached completion. However, in the process of all of those, what if we were just our favorite self? What does that look like when we can take the ego and its scaredness and we can put it aside? What do we look like when we are our favorite self? Our perspective is going to give another viewpoint. However, that third perspective is God's perspective, what God thinks and what God says, and how we will often live in the world's view or our view, and then use God's view lastly. The cool part about life is when we learn how to use God's view first. It sets us up for success. It sets us up for preparation that we don't even know that we need. God says that He sets our path for us. And when we dive into who He is, when we seek that wisdom of who He is, He will show us our path. Now, why don't we do that? Why don't we start with God's view? Well, God's view requires sacrifice. When we look to society's view, society allows us to think that we are most important, that our opinion matters, that we are deemed important. When we look at society's view, we are allowed to be in control. We are within our comfort zone and we can stay where we want to be. Society's view and our view allows us to stay in that comfort zone. However, on the other side of comfort zones is the comforter. And when we step into God's view about something, then that means that we trust, that we release, that we are allowing His will to come to pass through faith. You see, society's view and our view will have things under control. But when we live in God's view, then we have the faith and the release to let Him work things for our good. So to be able to see things differently means that we see it from God's point of view, which requires that we let go of control. That is hard. That is hard as a human to let go of control. It is much easier to stay in the I love Jesus club where we get to do what we want and live the life we want and pray to Jesus when we need things versus living in the surrendered sacrifice life that looks to God's point of view and applies that to our life. It is much easier to look at society's view or to look at our own view than it is to look at God's view. However, again, for things to look different, they have to look different. If we want God's blessing in our life, then we have to be willing to see things from His point of view, to ask Him to play out His will in our life, and to be submissive to what that will is, even when it doesn't feel that great. So, what comes as a result from each of these different views? Well, society view is going to give you validation. It's going to give you recognition for all the things that you've done. Living life by the way society tells you that you're supposed to, when you do that, you get rewards from it that make you feel good and important and needed. However, when we live from God's view, it can be terrifying. It can be nerve-wracking because we are living by faith. Living in our own view, that just has us in a mess because we get all of those conversations that we have within our mind and then we're just running circles. We often think that we are looking at our viewpoint when we are looking at society's viewpoint. Those two can mix and mingle so often. However, when we look at God's point of view and we start to mix and mingle our point of view and it resembles God's point of view, that is when things start to change in our life. We're not Jesus, so we're not going to get it perfect. But what does it look like in our life to start seeing things through God's perspective? For that to become our perspective. When things look different, they become different. If you want a life that is different, then you have to start seeing it, acting it, speaking it differently. Having a plan is always going to set us up for success more than not. What is it? The planning to fail, fail to plan, planning to fail. It is going to serve us to be ready to have some sort of action. We don't know what's going to happen in life exactly, but to have some sort of plan to put in place when we notice ourselves falling back into society's viewpoint, or we notice ourselves looking at what we think versus what God thinks. Some things that work really well for me are having that back to normal. So my back to normal is take a shower, brush my teeth, read my Bible, straighten my area, and feel good about me. When I do those things, I am more settled. Add in sleeping and eating, and then I am prepared to take on my day in a way that serves me, in a way that feels good and honoring. I am much more able to hear God's point of view, God's voice, when I am setting myself up for success. How do we set ourselves up for success? Are you planning your meals so that you are ready, so that you are fed well, so that you can hear well? Are we handling our evenings in a way that is honoring to our next day so that you can hear well the next day and you can see? And your first instinct is God's perspective and not your own or society's. When we plan, we set ourselves up to be able to hear God easier. Being ready for new opportunities. So, as we step into seeing things in God's perspective, we are able to see new opportunities that are going to come to us. At the same time, on the flip side of that, if we are living this as society's point of view or how society thinks we should live, or even how we think we should live, we're not going to see those opportunities. And chances are we're going to see ones that are not necessarily for us, even though they might feel great in the moment. Here's one little bonus tip. Not everyone is going to like who you're becoming in this process. You see, when you start doing things differently, when you start asking for God's will, God's perspective to show up in your life, and no longer look to society or to look what makes you feel good, you're going to change. Not everyone is ready for that change. Not everyone is asking for you to be someone different. And that's okay. We cannot grow and stay the same. We cannot grow and stay the same. So if you are in a circle of people that are requiring you to stay the same, that circle of people does not want you to grow. That circle of people are not pushing you to grow. That circle of people are not encouraging you to grow. And just as with all things, there is a time and a place and a season. And if those people are not ready to step into your next season with you, that is okay. Some things you can do, you can be a mentor to those people as to what God has shown you, God's perspective versus society's perspective. Now, allowing a renewed mind to take place is going to go against what you've been taught. We are taught from young children to hear society and what it asks of us and to perform. When we listen to God's perspective, when we ask to see God's perspective on things, that is going to go against habits and patterns that we have been taught for all of our life. being ready, noticing, seeing, discerning those moments, it will allow you to step forward new. God says that we are to renew our mind, that He gives us a renewed mind. And that is what we are doing. It is not just a blank slate the moment that we ask Jesus to come into our heart. It doesn't just clear out all the old data, all that neuroplasticity, the way the nerves work in our or the neurons work in our brain. It doesn't just clear out and start over. It says we are to renew our mind. That means it is a system, it is a process, it is something that happens over time when we put intentional act and effort and consistency into it, encouraging that new mind to exist, giving space for that new perspective to come in. You see, our minds, you see, a confused mind says no. And if your mind is confused about this new perspective that you are looking for, asking to show up in your world, in your life, when your mind sees that and it's not used to it, it might freak out a little bit. And that's okay. We want to encourage that new mind to grow. There are things that we can do to encourage that new mind to grow. We can get around other people that think that way. We can read books that encourage that. We can lean in and hear the voice of God in how to encourage that new mind and then creating consistency. As people, we are going to hop back and forth. We do it with diets, we do it with friendships, we do it with all different types and spaces and places in life. However, when we can start to go to God's perspective first, and the more often we are able to do that, the better off we will be, the more well guided we will be, the closer to God's footsteps we will be. So, creating consistency might not necessarily be easy, but it is worth the intentional effort that you put into it. I know as people, we don't always get it right. And we are all just trying to figure it out, from raising kids to eyeliner, all of it. We're just trying to figure it out. However, I want you to remember, however, I'm going to encourage you to remember that God said that He would direct your path. We just have to look towards Him to know what path to take. Society is going to be there. It's going to give its opinion and it's going to tell you what you should, have to, need to, gotta, oughta, and better, supposed to do. However, when we look internally and we say, you know what, not my will be done, but yours, everything changes when we're able to lean into that, adjust, modify, and adapt. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, make sure to share it with someone that you love that would also benefit from this. Having a new mindset, one that follows after Jesus in our life, in our work, in our business, in our relationships, in all the different areas, is going to set you up for success. Remember, success isn't always what you put in the bank account or are able to take out. Success means that at the end of the day, when it is all said and done, when we are welcomed into those pearly gates, that He says, well done, good and faithful servant. All right, friends, we will see you soon. I hope you have a great day and this encouraged you. Remember, society will always give you its viewpoint. You're always going to have yours, but the one we want to look toward, the one we want to make consistent, and the one we want to encourage is God's viewpoint in our life. See you soon.